Welcome to IVF This, episode 50, IVF'ers Like Us with Charlotte E. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. I'm a mother to two beautiful and feral boys. I'm married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, my beautiful friends. Hope you're having an amazing week. This week, I'm joined by another one of my previous coaching clients, Charlotte, who is just a delightful individual all the way around. But she came on today to talk about her journey as it relates to IVF, but also her journey working together as a coach-client relationship. So she started out, and she'll talk a lot about this when she kind of reviews what happened, but she started out with really a lot of not unbelief, but she really wasn't sure how much she believed in herself and how much power she really had and how much control she really had. And then by the end of working together, she realized that she had so much more control, so much more power, so much more empowerment than she ever gave herself credit for. So I'm really excited to offer you guys this episode today because she touches on amazing points like, again, empowerment and faith, investing in yourself, which is a big thing. So I hope you enjoy this. As always, I offer them free mini sessions, the complimentary mini sessions. That was actually the way that Charlotte and I met. She booked a mini session. And then after working together on the mini session, we moved into a full consultation and then we started working together. There is no requirement for you to continue working with me at the mini session. The mini session is just 30 minutes for you to be coached, for you to experience what it's like to be coached, for you to work through anything, one specific issue that you really want some assistance with, some support with. That is what those are for. So go to my website, www.ivfthiscoaching.com, and you can book a free mini session. Again, 30 minutes, straight coaching. There's no sales pitch in the time that you are being coached. It is completely dedicated to that. If you want to talk about working together, we can absolutely do that once the coaching is over, but I always want to offer you that. Again, that's how I met Charlotte and how we formed our friendship and our coaching client relationship. And it's just such a lovely opportunity for us to spend some time together. So enjoy this episode and have a beautiful week. Oh, Charlotte, I'm so excited to get to talk to you today. Thank you for being on here. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your journey and where you are right now?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, my husband and I were finishing up school and we decided that we were both on board to start growing our family. And so we started trying to conceive. An agonizing year later, we still were not pregnant. And so we started going to doctor's appointments and things trying to figure out what the cause might be. And so after a few months of appointments and lab work and things, we learned that low sperm motility was a factor for us. And from there, we were referred to see our fertility doctor at the clinic where we have been going since then. At that first appointment that we had, the doctor looked over all of our information, all the lab results and everything. And he said that IVF would really be our best step forward, just starting off right off the bat. So we didn't do any other treatments before that. So we dove in head first, not really knowing anything about what we were getting into. But so it was a little overwhelming at first to get into that. But that was like 6 months ago that we had that appointment. And now last week we had our first embryo transfer. And so we're in the middle of that really glorious 10 to 12 day wait to find out if we'll be having a baby next summer. So that's where we are.
Amazing. Yes, I love that you use the word glorious. That is not typically in our vernacular as we describe the 2-week wait, but I love it. It's a great word. And I think when we use it ironically, it perfectly captures our feelings during the 2-week wait.
Yep.
Like mine and my husband's story, we have both male and female factor infertility, but I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about male factor infertility because there is this stigma or belief that infertility is like a quote unquote woman's issue, right?
Right.
It's our fault. We bear the social burden of it. And so with male factor infertility, which if you're listening and you're not familiar, male factor infertility accounts for 1/3 of all infertility diagnoses. So it's kind of this even cut pie. 1/3 is male factor infertility, 1/3 is female factor infertility, and 1/3 of what I call the bucket of yuck, which is unknown infertility, kind of all the question marks. But in your experience for male factor infertility, typically when we have female factor infertility or unknown, most of my clients, most of the people that I talk to, blame themselves so much, like just tear themselves down that it's quote unquote their fault.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, as a wife of someone with male factor infertility, was that your experience with your husband?
Right. Yeah. It was a bit of a learning curve for me at first. Like my initial reaction was basically, okay, so how are we going to fix this? And like, what can we do? There's got to be a way to make this better, kind of a thing. There's got to be something that we can do that will be different, that will fix this issue.
Mm-hmm.
So consulting with Dr. Google and all of that, just coming up with my own ideas of what could help this. And that wasn't helpful. That wasn't really helpful at all. Over time, I realized, this is just something we don't have control over. And especially, in talking with doctors and, are there things we could try that would fix this root cause kind of a thing? Or what are our options? And basically there wasn't really a answer that was easier than IVF. So getting to that realization of this is not anyone's fault. I think I probably had a healthier response to this male factor infertility than I would have had if it had been female factor infertility.
Yes.
Yes. There was definitely a learning curve, but my mind never went to, this is his fault. It was just, I definitely wanted to find a solution. And I felt like there had to be a way that we could fix it. But I learned that there wasn't really a way to fix it as far as medical treatments go right now. Maybe in the future, but right now that's not really an option for us. Realizing that, this would have been very different if this had been quote unquote my fault. I would have been giving myself a much harder time.
Right. And I think that's incredibly insightful because that tells us right there, just acknowledging that it was easier for me to accept this was something we couldn't change because it was him versus it being my fault if it was me. That tells us that blame isn't an automatic thing.
Right.
It's not inevitable for infertility because, and this was kind of my experience too. It was almost like, it was almost like any other medical diagnosis. Oh, my husband has blue eyes. Well, it's not his fault he has blue eyes. They're beautiful blue. It's totally fine. Right? He has male factor infertility. That's a part of him. This is our experience. But when it came to my diagnosis, it was much different. Even though it's essentially the same. It is a diagnosis that impacts infertility. So I think that's incredibly insightful that you recognize that this might have been a totally different journey if there had been a female factor identified or even an unknown. So my beautiful friends listening, fault is not inevitable. It's not necessary. And oftentimes it's not true, right? We've got our endometriosis warriors. We've got our PCOS warriors. That is a medical diagnosis similar to diabetes, cancer, anything else is not your fault. So I'm so glad we got to talk about that. You took it right from me. You knew the carrot that I was hanging out there and you took it. I'm so proud of you. It's amazing.
Oh, thanks.
So how did you find me and what made you decide to contact me and seek out coaching?
When when we first put in our deposit for IVF and we're preparing for our first cycle, it was pretty overwhelming. Like I mentioned before, my mom is a little bit of a podcast junkie, which is great. And she sent me a few podcasts related to infertility, IVF, journeys, treatments, and everything. So that got me kind of thinking, I wonder, what else like this is out there? And so I started looking for podcasts about IVF specifically, and I came across IVF This. And just from the beginning, it felt like a really safe space. Like it felt like I was maybe just listening to a sister or a friend just talking about their experience, and it felt like a really safe place. Emotionally, it felt like a very healthy place to be. And so I was excited to contact you and have a consultation with you and get working on all of the things that we've been working on or that we worked on over those 3 months together. I think one of the episodes that I remember listening very specifically to the episode about faith and IVF, how that relates to your journey. That really stood out to me because for whatever reason, I was just hesitant to talk about my faith and my fertility journey. There's a very select handful of people where I felt like I felt safe talking with them about those things, and where it felt like a productive conversation. And so listening to that episode really just even more made me feel at home with you, and like I would benefit from working with you.
Oh, I love that so much. We had a mini session and then a consultation, right? We did both?
Yeah, I know we did both. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember that being one of the first things that we talked about, and it was so interesting because when we were coaching together, we didn't necessarily spend that much time talking about your faith.
Right.
So it was almost as if it's not that we ignored it completely, but it was almost as if you just needed someone to tell you it was okay. Like just an acknowledgement of this is something that people question.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean anything about you or your faith practice or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. It was, like I said, it was just a matter of, I felt really at home. That was just another thing that helped me to feel safe emotionally, mentally, whatever. It just felt like you were someone that I would be able to talk to, and I would, with the things that are important to me, I wouldn't be judged. I wouldn't be told, oh, you shouldn't be thinking in that way, or that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I seem to remember you had worked with a coach before, right?
Yeah.
You had a coach before, and that was not maybe your experience with them, or? There
was never a moment of, with that coach saying anything that was accusatory or anything like that. It was, they were a very good coach overall. My experience with it was more just, I felt like we reached a point of a plateau where I didn't really feel like I was progressing any further, and I didn't really have a ton of confidence that we would continue progressing. So I just kind of stopped. It felt like I'd gotten kind of what I needed from that experience, and so I just stopped. But that was only a few months before we learned about IVF, and so when we made our deposit for IVF, I was realizing, okay, this is going to be another new emotional roller coaster that I'm going to be riding here over the next few months. And so that really opened me up again to the idea of let's get some help along the way. And especially the fact that you've been through IVF, you're a very seasoned IVF veteran yourself. So having that perspective just really made me feel comfortable and like it was something that I wanted to do. And when I asked you, I think I remember in our mini session, I expressed the concern, like, what if we reach another point of plateau where I feel like we're not really getting anywhere with it? And I remember you mentioning that that would not be an issue, basically. You had so many questions on hand and so many things that we could talk through and different angles that we could approach. And I felt really confident that it would be worthwhile.
I love that so much. One of my favorite things about when we were working together was that we actually spent quite a bit of time on your like professional development.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when we first started working together, you were kind of nervous about talking about that. But I have a philosophy, and I shared it with you many times, that all roads lead to Rome. So however we do one thing is how we do all things, or most everything. And so even though, because I get this question a lot, like, well, infertility isn't the only thing that I have in my life, but how you kind of were navigating your professional life, and you were kind of in this juxtaposition of, I'm a professional, but not really where I wanted to be. And so a lot of the ways that you were kind of managing and navigating that were still applicable to IVF, because we could still kind of pick it up and move the pieces wherever we needed to. But I think that's always such a great example. I actually, when I talk to people about when I'm doing consults or mini sessions, and they say, well, what about, if I have something I want to talk about with my family? I'm like, let me tell you about Charlotte. I don't use her name, but let me tell you about this amazing, you're a professional musician. And we spent a lot of time talking about that and professional development and things like that. And it was we were able to kind of beautifully move those pieces wherever we needed to in relation to whatever was happening. If it was IVF, if it was, getting all of your meds together, if it was navigating anxiety, anything like that, right? That med debacle. Oh my goodness. But, I think that's really important to know about coaching, and especially coaching with me, is there's always something that we can talk about. There's always something that we can take a look at. Doesn't mean that everything needs to be fixed or that your thoughts have to change, but everything is Marie Forleo, I think is her name. Her catchphrase is, everything is figure outable. So we can figure out anything. I love that so much. So let me ask you, what was the most impactful part of working together?
Yeah, I think there were really two things that were kind of hand in hand, but one of them, the first thing that was a little bit weird when I first started doing these coaching sessions was getting used to the idea of investing in myself, because I feel like as a society, we're really used to investing in our homes or our cars or our education or whatever it is, but we don't often, or even like in our physical health, like we'll spend quite a lot of money on, sometimes eating the right things or maybe getting a personal trainer, that kind of thing. But we're not really used to investing in our overall well-being and our relationships with ourselves. And so for me, getting used to that idea, it was a little bit uncomfortable at first. Like, It is an investment to do coaching. That's not a small thing. And so getting used to that idea. But then over time, I think the thing that was so great about it was that just the sense of empowerment that came from knowing that I know how to take care of myself is super invaluable. I remember at the beginning of our sessions, or, previous to our sessions, I was basically functioning from the mindset of, well, I've got to do IVF if I want to be happy. So we're going to do IVF because I want to be happy. So we're going to do IVF. That was that's not really an exaggeration of where my mind was at the point when we first made the deposit for our cycle. But by the end, before the end, even really, within just a couple of months of our working together, I was no longer thinking so much in that way. I was thinking more the lines of, I have choices and I don't have to wait to be happy. That shift in my mindset was so powerful, so invaluable, that it really changes the way that I approach my day-to-day life. And I feel like I'm more aware of how my thoughts, the control that I have when it comes to my thoughts and feelings, and the choices that I have through whatever it is that I'm experiencing. I have a say in what my experience looks like, which is so different from, this is the only way that I can be happy.
So good. And I distinctly remember that call where you told me, I realized that I have options, because I think I probably jumped out of the chair. I'm a pretty expressive coach, just so you guys know. But I think I jumped out of my chair because that is the ultimate get in a coaching relationship, because when we did start working together, it was this idea, and I'm so glad you mentioned like the investment part, because for women, most of us don't believe that either we deserve or it's important for us to invest in ourselves. We'll invest in things that society tells us to invest in, hair color, cuts, makeup, things to help us look skinnier or whatever. But in service to the relationship with ourselves, that's a completely different story. That's something that's so far overlooked. So I'm so glad you brought that up. And then that really does go into the other point you made about having that empowerment. Because when we started working together, your brain didn't want to believe that there was any other path to happiness but having a kid, right, but going through IVF.
Right.
Now, that's a goal that so many of us have. And that's a belief system that so many of us have, but it really excludes, number one, the possibility of happiness that already exists in our lives while we're still pursuing that goal. But it also discounts like the person that you are pre or post, wherever you are in your journey, the person that you are right now, and that person deserves to be happy.
Right.
And I think we spent quite a bit of time on that everything that you wanted, you already deserved. It was already a divine right that you had. And for you to have the opportunity to like embrace that and accept it and own it. That was probably one of my favorite things about working with you, is that you kind of saw over the course of the weeks that we worked together, towards the latter end, you really owned that empowerment, right? So let's make it very clear. We didn't erase your anxiety.
No.
Right?
Definitely not.
We didn't get rid of that. You never have to be anxious again, right?
No.
We didn't get rid of any potential sadness that you've experienced, right? But what did change with owning that empowerment and feeling more empowered?
Yeah, I think in that same session where you jumped out of your chair,
I did, folks.
The thing that I remember going through my mind was, oh, I'm strong. Which, if anyone asked me before, I wouldn't have said that I wasn't strong necessarily. But like, as far as actually believing in my own strength and my own ability to experience the things that life can throw at us, and my ability to get through that and be stronger and not fall apart, which it's okay if I do fall apart, but I can be strong through the process. Just realizing that I was strong was something that was like, oh, this isn't any different from what there's nothing new in me. This has been here the whole time. I've always had the capacity to take care of myself, to think thoughts that are useful for me, and to craft my own experience, I guess, in the way that I want to experience it. I just hadn't really realized that in such a deep way until it really just kind of hit me. That one session was like, oh, this is what I needed to learn, basically.
Yes. Oh, it's so good. I feel like we talked about this too. One of my favorite movies growing up was Dumbo. Mm-hmm. Do you remember what I told you this?
Yeah.
It was never in a condescending way, but in the movie when they take the feather away and Dumbo flies anyway, and now I can't remember. Ooh, the 37-year-old brain has kicked in. Can't remember who said it, but it was, you never needed the feather to fly. You had it in you the entire time.
Right.
And I truly do believe that. If you've ever talked to me on a mini session or anything, I talk about how your brains are like a switchboard, and I'm the switchboard operator. You have everything you need. What I'm doing by asking questions is just plugging the receiver into the different kind of areas of the switchboard just to try and figure out what clicks and what helps. So I never gave you new thoughts to think.
Right.
Everything was yours. And oh my gosh, I could just cry. I told you I'm expressive, folks, but I could just cry because yes, that was this remarkable transformation that you had when it was like, oh yeah, this does kind of suck, but I know how to manage when things suck. I know how to take care of myself when things suck. I just know, as opposed to kind of where a lot of us are before coaching is we're kind of trapped in this, oh, I don't know what I would do if. I don't know what I would do if. Mm-hmm. And that's the wrong question. Right? Because that question will never yield anything useful. It's just going to kind of keep you caught in a loop of all of the things that you're afraid of. And the question that we got you to ask is, how can I take care of myself? Should this come to pass? We mentioned the medication fiasco, and that was like an all-day thing. You didn't even get the meds that night, and you had to start your meds a day later. When we talked, you were like, I was really anxious. I was really upset. And then towards the end of the day, it was like, okay, I literally can't do anything else at this point to get what I wanted to get. I'm disappointed, and that's okay. And that's all we're talking about is just, you were like, okay. Acceptance wasn't like, oh, I'm so glad that I get to start my medication tomorrow. Well, this goes completely against my plan, and that's wonderful. It was an acceptance of, oh, this is where I am. I can't do anything else. And driving myself crazy over all the scenarios is not going to be beneficial. So good. Okay. Well, this is the next question. We might have already touched on it just by the jumping out of my chair sort of thing. But what was your favorite memory of us working together?
Well, the jumping out of the chair was a good one. But there's another one that I remember that was a really good learning opportunity for me, which was, it was probably around the time where I was just feeling super overwhelmed, trying to figure out medications and insurance. I was a nervous wreck for a week or so, figuring some of that stuff out. But in that session, or before we started that session, I was just kind of like, okay, Charlotte, pull yourself together. Like, let's just get ready so we can talk and like address, I need to be ready to talk through these things with Emily so that I'm not just crying through the whole session. Like, let's just pull myself together here. But within about 2 minutes, it didn't take long at all. You were like, how are you doing? You seem different today. And the tears came, and you helped me walk through processing what I was feeling at that minute, like in real time, which was super beneficial because it really taught me that like a lot of the work that we need to do is not necessarily, it might not feel like work. Basically, what we did was sitting, allowing that feeling to be there, describing that feeling, and really paying attention to it, which is pretty different from, okay, we need to talk about this, and oh, there's this problem too, right? Like the brain just kind of going all over the place. But the actual work that was beneficial that I needed at that moment was not necessarily talking about everything. It was learning how to feel everything, feeling what I was feeling at that time. And so, yeah, you knew exactly what I needed, and you just helped. It was super nice to be able to be walked through that process in a moment where I really needed to center myself and get in touch with how I was really doing.
Oh my gosh. I remember that day very clearly because it was like but really? What's happening? Like the loving head tilt of the friend, like, but really what's happening? But I think that's so true because so many of us think that the work is how we can outact, how we can take action out of a feeling, which is what you were trying to do. You were like, okay, we're going to cover this. We're going to cover this. Like you had an agenda, but your feelings weren't going anywhere. And in fact, just ignoring them was, I think the reason why our feelings feel like they're almost on the surface, like a raw nerve that's just in a moment is about to be exposed, is because we're spending so much time trying to stuff them down by feeling productive, by doing things, by setting expectations for ourselves, that the moment someone's like, what's happening here? And then the tears just fall. But if we actually take the minute, and I would venture to guess, I don't remember exactly, but it took us less than 10 minutes.
It was fast.
to get through those emotions to allow you to process them. I think I even made you do you jogged around your house or something, right?
I think that was a different time, but yes, that happened.
Oh, that was a different time?
Yeah.
Yeah. But at the end, when we're processing an emotion, and I talk about this in my infertility burnout part 2 episode, you have to finish the stress cycle. So at the end, I always ask, so what does this emotion make you want to do? And one time it made you want to, you were like, I feel like I just have to run or something.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, put me on mute because we're on Zoom. Put me on mute. You did a couple of laps. You came back. You're like, okay, I feel better.
Yeah. I remember that one very clearly too.
We get so caught up in not listening to our bodies, trying to outmaneuver our bodies, but our bodies always know exactly what we need. Mm-hmm. So I love that. That was so amazing. Oh, brought me down to memory lane. I love it. Okay. So last question, what advice do you have for the fellow IVF'ers, the one who are listening to the podcast? Maybe they've done a round, maybe they've never done a round when we met, but what would be your biggest takeaway?
I would say to make sure that you honor yourself throughout your journey. At least for me, a lot of what has made my experience so difficult with infertility in general and going through IVF, the times where I feel awful are the times where I am comparing my journey to someone else's, or I feel like my life should be going a different way than it is going, or because everyone else's, quote unquote, everyone else's life is going a particular way. I think the more I experience, the more I learn that no one's life is meant to be the same as anyone else's. Everyone's journey is unique. And so every person is unique. And so making room for yourself in your journey is, I think, really important. And also kind of along those lines, making sure that you give yourself credit where credit is due for specifically what we were talking about earlier, as far as your circumstances don't have the power to dictate your experience. You have that power, and making sure that you hold on to that power. And yeah, you have more power than you probably think in your experience. It can feel really disempowering. It can feel like there's no control over this part of your life that has been your dream for your whole life. And suddenly you feel like you can't do anything about it. And that can be really tough. But recognizing that you have power in whatever circumstance you have is so important. So yeah, honor yourself, honor the power that you have.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Yes. We talk about it all the time in coaching. There are always 3 things you control in any circumstance: your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. And so within the context of those 3 things, we always have more power and more control than we ever give ourselves credit for. Oh, I love that so much. It has been an absolute delight getting to talk to you again. I haven't talked to Charlotte in probably a couple of months now. And so it's so lovely to get to talk to you again. Thank you so much for being on. And yeah, I just adore you. Thank you.
Thank you. Likewise. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.